Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
8:07 on O'Connor and Company. Coming up in 30 minutes, we're going to reflect a little bit more on the legacy of Ozzy Osbourne with David Wild. It's Larry O'Connor with Julie Gunlock. Good morning, Julie.
Good morning.
During the Biden administration, when we first started hearing the reports that tens of thousands of young children had just sort of disappeared from the radar of the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Health and Human Services, we were stunned, shocked, outraged, and frankly, at times I felt despair over this, that these children had so-called gotten lost in the system, as they like to say. These are children who came here unaccompanied across our border, oftentimes exploited by human traffickers, drug dealers, drug cartels, and then our government willingly handed them over to people without ever having any proof that they were aunts or uncles or sponsors or in any way had some sort of responsibility for those children, and then failed to do any serious follow-up to make sure that the kids were okay. And frankly, that's just scratching the surface of how horrible this story is. We're learning more, and to shed some more light on this, and maybe some people on Capitol Hill who listen to this show or in the administration who listen to this show might hear this and actually prioritize this issue more than they have. Let's bring in Allie Hopper. She is a recognized counter-trafficking expert, and she founded Guard Against Trafficking. She testified about this issue earlier this week, and she joins us now. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Hopper, and thank you for the work you do.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry and Julie, for having me.
Let's start with the big revelation this week about these unanswered phone calls. So the Biden administration, through what HHS or DHS, they set up a hotline. So if these children felt like they were in danger or had any issues, they could call that number, right? And then what happened?
Correct. So the hotline was set up so that anyone in the community, whether it was the child themselves or a community member, could report, concerns over this child. And what we found out through multiple interviews, conversations with whistleblowers, and through our own investigation was that 65,000 calls went unanswered. Now, that's not total calls received, but 65,000 calls going unanswered is absolutely unacceptable. And then we found out that there was only one person assigned to that hotline.
One person for how many children are we talking about here?
For the entire hotline.
Do we know how many kids are in question here in terms of being handed over to suspect sponsors?
So the number that's floating there is the over 300,000 that are unaccounted for at this time.
And they had one person manning the phone.
Allie, how many, or I'm sorry, where did these calls go exactly? To a federal agency, state agencies? Where did it go?
So it was a federal hotline. And the way that my understanding of how a hotline should work, at least at the federal level, is you receive a call and you determine what state, you determine, what the circumstances of the call are, and then you direct it to the appropriate state and local agencies. But when you have 65,000 calls that go unanswered, and then you have a horrifying situation where this current administration, the Trump administration, found that 65,000 calls were unanswered, and they took it initiative. They made it a priority that even though that those calls were old, even though they've been sitting there for a while, they still prioritized it to go through each and every phone call, to follow up on each and every call that was made and that was not answered. And so what I had testified to was that there was a call about a child that had reported that men were coming into his room at night and touching him. And so the Trump administration followed up on that call, and the child was rescued and the sponsor was arrested.
We're speaking with Allie Hopper. Her organization is Guard Against Trafficking, and we're trying to sort of unfold more information about the scandal. And I'm talking about a horrific scandal during the Biden administration of these lost children. And we've noticed a trend here because we've tracked some of the testimony that occurred during the last administration as Republicans tried to hold members of the Biden administration's feet to the fire on this. And there's a trend here. If you get Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security, testifying, he'll say, oh, well, that's not really our jurisdiction. We hand these children over and it's HHS to take care of. And then you get Secretary Becerra up there from HHS, and when asked about following up on these children and trying to help them out, he says, oh, that's not our jurisdiction. That's a DA. I mean, they're all pointing the finger at each other. Who is responsible here?
Right.
Exactly. And that was by design. When you point the finger at each other and then you can't figure out who's responsible, then it's hard to get accountability and true oversight for these things. So again, when you have a hotline, that didn't function the way that on paper it's supposed to, and then you sit there and you're trying to determine or maintain a database of sponsor information. So that was the other thing I testified to, was the sponsor information. There was no meaningful process to vet these sponsors, to conduct meaningful background checks on these sponsors. And so they would just take in the information, send these children out to these sponsors. And when you go through a tougher process to adopt a dog from a shelter
Yes.
than it is to sponsor a child, you go through more paperwork. You have to do identity verification, income verification. They sometimes, to adopt a dog, they come to your home to see the situations and circumstances at home, but they did not do any of this to sponsor a child. So my business partner, Dr. Sadowski, and I, we've done a lot of work. We've interviewed incarcerated traffickers. We've been on the border. We've spoken to unaccompanied children. We know this firsthand. This isn't, information that we read somewhere or we watched a video somewhere. This is information that we got on the border from the people themselves. And so when the cartels knew about how this process worked, they exploited it. They knew to hand children sponsor information because they knew there was no meaningful vetting.
Allie, because of Doge, we know how some of this money moved around, and we know that there are several NGOs. I mean, they've just made hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government, but NGOs also had a role in this. What role exactly did the NGOs, I mean, I'm talking Catholic Charities and several others, play in vetting these people, or did they again just sort of not do that? Did they just sort of say, throw their hands up and say there's not enough sort of resources to do that? What was their role?
So it's interesting with NGOs. You would have to look at the contracts, what their contractual obligations were for that grant money. That makes it harder because every contract is different. Every scope and requirements are different for every single contract that the government issues. So it makes it really hard for accountability to be had without going through every single contract and every single grant that was issued. But at the end of the day, even if HHS expected the NGOs to vet the sponsors, they don't have the capability. They don't have the ability to go do background checks on these sponsors and do home studies. They don't have that ability. That is a federal and state responsibility to be able to access the databases needed to check on the backgrounds of these sponsors.
Allie Hopper's organization is Guard Against Trafficking, and they're doing the Lord's work there. And Allie, real fast, give us some upside here. Are you confident that the new administration, I know Tom Homan has been very vocal about wanting to find all of these kids and ensure that they're in safe hands. How do you feel that effort is going, and do they need more help?
They absolutely need more help. They need local and state agencies to help the federal initiatives that they have to find these children. And there is an upside. I mean, we are finding these children. As Representative or Congressman Higgins said, 35,000 of those children have been recovered, have been found. And so we are working very hard. This administration is working very hard to undo the horrifying reality that the last administration left. But there is hope, and we just need to continue to support this administration in their efforts.
Thank you, Allie. Allie Hopper, Guard Against Trafficking. Really appreciate it. Sorry, I don't mean to sound so down right now, but this is just, it's so sobering and it's so horrible. And I pray for these children regularly. We all should. It's 8:16.